It's July 19, 1952. Just past midnight, and a radar operator at Washington National Airport is watching something that has no business being on his screen. Multiple objects, tracked simultaneously on two independent radar systems, moving at speeds no aircraft in the world could match. Not one operator. Not one screen. Two systems, different equipment, different operators, the same picture on both. These weren't eyewitness stories. They were logged, investigated, and argued over in military briefings. 5 cases from that single year produced data so hard to explain that the Air Force's own analysts couldn't close the files. Instantaneous acceleration. Right-angle turns at hypersonic speed. Objects clocked well above Mach 9 with zero sonic boom. 5 cases, 5 sets of hard data, and official explanations that fall apart the moment you read the actual reports. The Civil Aeronautics Authority radar at Washington National picked up the first returns around 11:40 p.m. What separated this from a standard anomalous blip was the confirmation. Andrews Air Force Base radar independently tracked the same objects at the same time. And it wasn't just radar. On the ground, civilians were watching the same objects with their own eyes. One witness described standing on a street in northeast D.C. when something drifted upward above the rooftops. He said the underside of it looked like lava bubbling, a reddish-black mass churning at the bottom of the object as it climbed. Not a reflection. Not a light. Something generating heat or energy visible from street level, moving silently upward into the dark. The objects moved at an estimated 7,000 miles per hour and executed turns that would generate somewhere between 100 and 1,000 g-forces depending on the turn radius. The human body blacks out around 9 Gs. Fighter aircraft of that era were structurally rated for around 7. Whatever was making those turns wasn't designed around human biology or 1952 airframe engineering. The Air Force scrambled F-94 interceptors. The objects disappeared from radar the moment the jets entered the area, then reappeared after the jets left. That sequence repeated more than once across the night. Equipment malfunction doesn't respond to aircraft presence. A radar ghost doesn't clear a flight path and wait for the jets to leave before coming back. The official explanation was temperature inversion, a weather phenomenon where warm air traps cool air below and bends radar signals into false returns. Atmospheric ducting is real. But the Air Force's own analysts noted the returns were too sharp, too structured, and too consistent with maneuvering objects to fit the scatter profile of an inversion layer. The analysts put that observation in writing and the Air Force filed it anyway. DC wasn't a one-night anomaly. The same pattern repeated on July 26, 1 week later, and that second incident forced the Air Force into a press conference. They couldn't keep it internal anymore. What made the press conference remarkable wasn't what the Air Force admitted, it was the speed at which they retracted it. The same playbook had already run in 1947, when the military announced a recovered flying disc and pulled the statement within hours. By 1952 they had the process down. Make a minimal public statement, offer a conventional explanation before anyone can pressure test it, and move the actual analysis somewhere no press release will follow. 17 days before any of that happened, a Navy officer in Utah had already filmed something the government would spend years trying to explain away. Tremonton, Utah. July 2nd. Navy Warrant Officer Delbert Newhouse was driving through town when he spotted a group of objects in a clear daytime sky. Newhouse wasn't a civilian with a phone camera. He was a trained aerial photographer with over 1,000 hours of flight time, and he knew exactly what conventional aircraft looked like from the ground. He pulled over, grabbed his 16mm color camera, and filmed what he later described as 12 to 16 objects moving in ways he couldn't attribute to anything he'd worked around in his career. The Navy's photo laboratory spent roughly 1,000 hours analyzing the footage frame by frame. Their conclusion: the objects were self-luminous rather than reflective surfaces, and their movement patterns didn't match birds, balloons, or conventional aircraft. The analysts flagged the absence of a deceleration curve before directional changes. Every physical object operating under known aerodynamics shows measurable deceleration before a turn. These objects didn't show any. Project Blue Book's conclusion was seagulls. Two branches of the same government analyzed the same film and produced directly opposing findings. The Air Force quietly shelved the Navy's analysis and moved on. The unanswered question isn't what Newhouse filmed. It's why one federal agency buried another's technical findings on the same piece of evidence. Carson Sink, Nevada. August 1st. This one happens in broad daylight with two sets of trained eyes on it simultaneously. Light path over the desert. Both were combat veterans who between them had logged enough hours to recognize every aircraft the US and Soviet militaries were operating in 1952. Neither recognized what they saw. The objects crossed at a closing speed estimated between 1,500 and 3,000 miles per hour. The Bell X-1 had only broken the sound barrier 5 years earlier, and nothing operational flew anywhere near those speeds in 1952. At those velocities over open desert, a sonic boom would have been unavoidable. None was reported by either pilot or any ground observer in the area. The silence where that sound should have been is its own data point. Blue Book classified Carson Sink as unknown, one of the few cases where the official record simply stops trying to explain what happened. 3 cases in, and the same pattern keeps appearing: speeds that exceed known propulsion, missing acoustic signatures that physics says must exist, and official explanations that don't survive contact with the actual data. ND feet per second. Then, without warning, they flipped simultaneously on edge in reverse direction. No arc. No deceleration. No transition period. The formation went from full forward speed to the opposite heading in what Nash and Fortenberry described as an instant. Under Newtonian physics, an instantaneous velocity reversal at high speed doesn't just strain a propulsion system. It requires infinite force. There's no material known to engineering that absorbs that load, and there's no propulsion concept, rocket, jet, or otherwise, that produces it. 2 additional crew members on the same aircraft confirmed what the pilots reported independently. Blue Book listed Nash-Fortenberry as unknown. D.C. raised questions about speed and biological tolerance. Tremonton raised questions about optical signature. Carson Sink raised questions about acoustic physics. This one questions the fundamental mechanics of momentum and force. The objects didn't bend the rules. They ignored them entirely. Haneda Air Base, Japan. August 5th. This is the least cited case of the 5, and it's arguably the hardest one to dismiss. Air Force ground personnel tracked a bright object visually for over 30 minutes while ground radar confirmed the return simultaneously. When an F-94 interceptor was scrambled, its airborne radar picked up the same contact independently. 3 separate sensor sources locked onto the same object at the same time. The object held a near-stationary position, then accelerated to high speed in seconds without any detectable spool-up sequence. Then it dropped off radar while still fully visible to ground observers. It didn't leave the area. It didn't descend below the radar horizon. It stayed in plain sight and simply stopped returning a signal. Either it carried radar-defeating technology that neither the US nor Soviet programs had developed by 1952, or it had some physical property that radar couldn't interact with at all. 5 gaps. 5 separate points where the record goes quiet at exactly the moment you'd expect it to get loud. Not 5 unrelated anomalies, but 5 instances where the available evidence points toward the same missing explanation, and the official documentation stops just short of providing one. Washington showed objects outmaneuvering physics on 2 independent systems at once. Tremonton produced Navy film analysis that a separate government agency quietly buried. Carson Sink left no sonic signature where one was physically guaranteed. Chesapeake Bay logged a velocity reversal that Newtonian mechanics says is impossible. And Haneda tracked an object that vanished from radar while remaining visible to the naked eye. 3 of 5 cases officially classified as unknown by the Air Force's own investigators. Not by researchers or journalists. by the military analysts whose job was to find a conventional answer and close the file. They couldn't. The physics problems haven't been resolved in the 70 years since. The radar logs exist. The Blue Book files are declassified. The Navy's film analysis is documented. What's missing isn't the data. It's an explanation that actually fits it. The files are open. The gaps in them are not. If you want more investigations built on declassified records, not speculation, subscribe and share this with someone who asks the right questions.